Hi, I'm Thomas Bowles, Prince William County Agricultural Extension Agent. Welcome to our video. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming to this week's webinar. Our topic for the evening is protecting wildlife and biodiversity with safer mosquito control solutions. We have Liz Train from the Northern Virginia Bird Alliance as our presenter. And with that, Liz, if you want to go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Thanks so much to you all for inviting me to speak on this topic. It's really an important topic that I think a lot of people in the general public are not completely aware of the effects of mosquito spraying. And it's understandable in the face of any health crises, particularly, vector-borne diseases, that communities and health organizations scramble to prevent outbreaks by any means necessary. And spraying is usually a quick way to soothe the public's nerves. But as a strategy for controlling mosquitoes, it's a blunt and effective tool. It's the widespread application of adulticides creates a false sense of security, and it causes many unintended harms and far-reaching consequences. And it is possible through the application of common sense protocols and planning to do effective mosquito management that limits the impact on the environment. And that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. But first, I'm going to go through what the impacts are and sort of the whys and the evidence behind the harm that broad spectrum mosquito spraying does. Okay, let's see here. Not advancing. There we go. So in Northern Virginia Bird Alliance, the Wildlife Sanctuary Program, last summer we were challenged by one of our clients to provide the research behind our decision not to certify properties that employ broad spectrum mosquito spraying. Even though this client had done a ton of work on removing invasives, planting natives, working to improve the habitat, but they were religiously employing a mosquito fogging service every 3 weeks from April to November, and said that dropping that service was a red line for them, so we could not certify them. And mosquito fogging is an impediment to getting certified in our sanctuary certification program. So we dug into the research in order to have a document that was evidence-based to support our policy. And so Betsy Martin and I did a ton of research. So this is our Healthy Yard Pledge, and you don't need to know the whole pledge, but the bottom line is we ask people to adopt these practices, at least 2 of them, and then commit to employing all of them. And so no broad spectrum spraying for mosquitoes is one of our healthy yard best practices in the interest of reducing pesticides and herbicides. And if they do all of those other things, but they still spray and fog for mosquitoes, they're simply luring those pollinators into a death trap and reducing biodiversity not only on their own property, but their neighbors' properties as well. They're disrupting vital food webs and that support the wildlife around us. And the chemicals used in mosquito spraying solutions are adulticides. They're neurotoxins. They're pyrethroids, which are synthetic pyrethrins, which are plant-derived, or organophosphates like malathion. And organic or not, these pesticides kill every insect that they come into contact with. So the effect on mosquitoes is a knockdown. It's a knockdown on mosquitoes in the air, but the effect on all the other insects is direct, indirect contact, residual contact, etc. So it kills not only mosquitoes that are present in the area who are adults, who may have already laid eggs, they're already in the egg-laying business, but it also kills beneficial insects, to include the predatory insects that eat the mosquitoes, to include this ebony-jeweled damselfly, which you see here eating an Asian tiger mosquito. Dragonflies are voracious consumers of mosquitoes. So let's examine the evidence that supports the harmful effects of mosquito fogging. The UN did, I guess, contracted for a research paper on biodiversity and ecosystem services of pollinators, and found that globally 40% of pollinator populations were threatened, bees and butterflies, in the coming decades. And the top three factors contributing to that are, especially for pollinators, are pesticides, habitat loss, and disease. The abundance, diversity, and health of pollinators and their pollination services are threatened by the direct drivers this study produced or laid out, not only pesticides, but intensive agricultural management with the pesticide use, environmental pollution, invasive species, pathogens, and then climate change. So if you put insecticides and mosquito fogging on top of all of those other pressures, which are very difficult to manage, it's even more significant in terms of insect decline. So this study on pollinators defines animal pollination as an essential regulating ecosystem service that underpins food production and its contribution to gene flows and restoration of ecosystems, re biodiversity. So animal pollination plays a vital role as a regulating ecosystem service in nature. Globally, 90% of wild-flowering plant species depend on, at least in part, on the transfer of pollen by insects, by animals, primarily insects. So the plants are critical for the continued functioning of ecosystems, because they provide food, provide habitat, provide other resources for a wide range of other species, particularly human beings. So the next two slides just depict a quick recap of a very large library of research that documents the harm that pyrethrins and malathion, which is an organophosphate, have on insect populations, especially our native bees. So these insecticides leave residues on pollen, foliage that results, when ingested by the bees, results in a reduction of cavity and ground nesting activity, larval survival rates, abnormal development of larvae, increased mortality, delayed emergence, disrupting that critical relationship interaction between plants and insects, and completely disrupting the insect life cycles. So just here's more of the list. It goes on. And in addition to harming native bees, malathion and pyrethroids are extremely harmful to lepidopterans, butterflies, and moths, both in the adult and the caterpillar phase, the larval phase. And this body of research, and much more research, definitively links the significantly reduced native bee and lepidopteran populations in areas that are fogged by that employ mosquito fogging versus those that are untreated by mosquito fogging. So, as we all know, we're master gardeners. These insects provide a host of essential ecosystem services. The fruits and seeds by pollinated plants serve as primary food source for various animals. Pollinators contribute to overall biodiversity. They support a wide variety of plant species, which in turn sustain a wide variety of animal communities. And then our own human food security. A significant portion of our food crops rely on pollinators, such as bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds, to produce fruits and vegetables. And it's not just honeybees. Native bees play a really important role in crops that have to be buzz pollinated, like cranberries, blueberries. Pollinators play a crucial role in terrestrial food webs. We've all seen, as master gardeners, pretty familiar with these simple food webs. and they facilitate the reproduction of flowering plants, which are the primary food source for many herbivores, thus supporting the entire food chain. 90% of the world's plants would not produce fruits or seeds if there were if the pollinators are declined in significant numbers to interrupt those ecosystem services. So that impacts global food availability for not only the animals that rely on them, but us. Mosquito fogging is the least effective means of mosquito control because it uses adulticides that target adult mosquitoes that are airborne, and mosquitoes have different patterns of depending on what kind of mosquito it is, but with a knockdown effect. So a Cornell University study determined that 99.9% of the sprayed chemicals go off into the environment, posing risk to public health and ecosystems, and only 0.1% on average reaches the target species. That's an amazing finding from that research. So why do people spray for mosquitoes? Even though targeting adult mosquitoes with insecticides is the least effective means, there's a growing body of research that provides evidence that mosquitoes are developing resistance tolerance to these chemicals that are used in these sprays. And it's primarily the marketing and sales model that companies that sell their mosquito fogging services use. And it's one of fear mongering and guaranteeing a sustained business model for them. They come and they have to come back. It's a smart business model, but it's not an environmentally friendly business model. There's extensive academic and invertebrate conservation research. It's very, very clear that the harm that these mosquito sprays have on non-target invertebrates and other wildlife. And also, EPA does not test for those consequences, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. EPA itself acknowledges that its pollinator risk assessment protocols significantly underestimate the toll of pesticides on insect pollinators essential to food webs, biodiversity, and sustained healthy environment. It's a risk assessment that they take based on economics of agriculture and commercial horticulture. So this is an ad. I'm not picking on this one company. There are many companies that offer these mosquito fogging services, but this is one that came in the mail unsolicited to me. And you can read the quote that was on the mailer that came into my mailbox. But it's what the companies that offer these services don't tell you that's the problem. Mosquito fogging acts against all insects. So they talk about pests and unwanted insects. And then this 21-day barrier feature that they talk about is especially problematic in terms of residual toxicity. So when a pesticide has a long persistence in the field, there's more opportunity for absorption through multiple pathways of exposure for non-mosquito insects. And in general, pyrethroids have long half-lives, and that can range for anywhere from 5 to 170 days in the soil. Bifenthrin, which is a very common pyrethroid that is used by these services, has a half-life in soil of 96 days, and permethrin has a half-life of 39 days. So that's what is factoring into that 21-day barrier for mosquitoes, but it's also in the process killing native bees, every other insect that comes into contact, killing or definitively harming them and disrupting their life cycles. So as an example, if you have a garden, many of us in Northern Virginia have a lot of redbud trees, and leafcutter bees love the redbuds. So here is a photograph of a leafcutter bee nest. So this bee has taken the foliage and consumed it and chewed it up, and has gotten nectar and pollen from the flowers. Any of those would be sprayed in a home garden that employs these services and takes it back to the nest and lays an egg on it. So you have contaminated foliage, contaminated pollen. It compounds that lethal toxicity on the bees, their eggs, and their larvae. Same principle applies to the monarchs that are eating milkweed, if there's milkweed nearby that has been sprayed. Or the Pandora sphinx moth that lays eggs and the larvae feed on Virginia creeper and the birds eat those caterpillars. So you can see these neurotoxins are working their way up through the food chain, disrupting life cycles and decreasing the viability and survivability of those species. And I know we're master gardeners. We're all probably big fans of Doug Tallamy, so I don't need to remind you all that it takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to bring a single chickadee brood to fledging. But they're not done then because they hang around for another 21 days. And the parents are still feeding them caterpillars. So if they're feeding them affected caterpillars, it's a problem. So this is a label of bifenthrin, which is one of the commonly used pesticides for mosquito fogging. And I'm going to read you the quote on the label. Quote, "This pesticide is extremely toxic to fish and aquatic invertebrates. To protect the environment, do not allow pesticides to enter or run into the storm drains, drainage ditches, gutters, or surface waters. Applying this product in calm weather when rain is not predicted for the next 24 hours will help to ensure that the wind or rain does not blow or wash pesticide off the treatment area. Rinsing application equipment over the treated area will help avoid runoff to water bodies or drainage systems. Care should be used when spraying in and around ornamental ponds or streams. This product is highly toxic to bees exposed to direct treatment or residues on blooming crops or weeds. Do not apply this product or allow to drift to blooming crops if bees are visiting the treatment area," unquote. So given that guidance on the label, can we be certain that mosquito foggers are changing up their service route schedules to accommodate changes in the weather, fluctuating weather conditions? Can we be confident that their applicators who are licensed, appropriately licensed, can see or understand that everything is not a honeybee? So are they looking for the larger honeybees and not seeing presence of any other smaller native bees that just don't resemble honeybees at all? So there's a number of problems with this, even though the label specific, it's appropriately labeled. So it's essential, and the law, as we all know, that we read the label and before any application and abide by it before any application of pesticides. But even then, the label is produced based on testing of the pesticide on honeybees, contact testing in a controlled laboratory environment, which cannot be extrapolated to native bees, moths, and butterflies. They have completely different physiology, life cycles, and foraging behaviors. So these are the exposure pathways for insects to toxins sprayed by insecticides. So direct contact, indirect contact through residue, contaminated nesting material, contaminating nesting sites. So with this knowledge, we can easily see that native bees and lepidopterans are exposed to these pesticides long after the knockdown effect, which will also kill them if they're in the area, but long after the knockdown effect, for those 21 days that it is residual on the foliage and on the ground. The most common insecticides, as I said, are pyrethroids, the permethrin or the bifenthrin, or the malathion organophosphates. And these pesticides are neurotoxins, and they can either be synthetic or natural. A marketing mantra of many of the companies is it's organic, but it's organic doesn't mean it's not harmful. Native bees and butterflies and moths face compounded multiple pathways of exposure. They're exposed to higher levels of toxicity. So you can think about the ground nesting bees, nesting materials that bees use, puddling behavior, egg laying, and larval feeding for lepidopterans. All of those are significantly more impacted throughout a longer period of their life cycle than just the adult mosquitoes that are present at the time that the spray is sprayed. So when bees come into direct contact with the fogging mist while they're foraging, they get very disoriented. They experience paralysis. It's a neurotoxin. It reduces their foraging efficiency if it doesn't kill them. And in high doses, it does kill them. Sublethal exposure to the pollen and the nectar sources impairs bee learning, their memory, their navigation, all of which is extremely important to their ability to carry out their life cycle and their pollination services. And then butterflies and moths in their caterpillar larval stage are exposed to the residual pesticides on the foliage, and they suffer from delayed growth, stunted growth, deformities, and higher mortality rates as well. So the pyrethroids also interfere with that signaling by the host plant to the caterpillar, to the butterflies for laying eggs, mating, laying eggs, and host plant selection. So pyrethroids used in mosquito sprays contaminate surface waters. Now, the label says you can't use it within 25 feet of a body of water. And the EPA does report that pyrethroid detections are widespread in surface waters throughout the United States, including effluent from sewage treatment plants, downstream of agricultural areas, and insecticide contamination is much greater after a large storm effect, and we can really see that. We certainly see the effects of large storms all throughout Northern Virginia with the amount of development that we have in impervious surfaces. And even lawns are relatively impervious, particularly if they're compacted, and a heavy rain event can wash the chemicals into the waterway, even if it's 25 feet apart. I live on a hill. Water runs down my street directly into Accotink Creek, which is, I don't know, 500 yards away. And so, my neighbors who are spraying, that water is coming off into the street and going directly down into Accotink Creek. And so the larval stage of those aquatic invertebrates like dragonflies and damselflies and caddisflies are significantly infected, impaired, and affected and harmed. So in several studies, bifenthrin, which I showed you the label for previously, is the most commonly used in mosquito fogging, was the most frequently detected chemical in waterways. And that research shows that pyrethroids affect not only the macrobenthic invertebrates, but also the birds and bats that eat those aquatic insects that hatch out of the streams. So the concentration up the food chain is a risk that is not assessed by the EPA. So why don't application guidelines prevent harm to non-target species in the larger environment? It's because of how EPA tests pesticides. It's their testing protocols that are established. When a pesticide is registered by the EPA for use in agriculture or horticulture, that doesn't mean that it's safe for non-target insects or aquatic organisms, even when applied according to the label instructions. And I showed you that when I read the bifenthrin label. So the biology and ecology of native bees, moths, and butterflies differ significantly from the honeybees, and it's the honeybees that are tested. So from the standpoint of risk assessment for these pesticides, in particular, native bee and lepidopteran physiology, life cycles, and behaviors, they're so different from the European honeybee And that's the European honeybee is the sole proxy for assessing pollinator risk when EPA approves these pesticides. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. It's just the protocol. And
Yes.
it's, it is,
Although I
somebody needs
over the year, driving customer.
I want to be active, but I want to be safe. Virginia Burton driver lets me do both.
Severe weather can happen at any.
should somebody mute maybe? Okay. So the EPA requires registrants, the pesticide companies, only requires them to submit data addressing pesticide impacts on honeybees, and it treats honeybees as a surrogate for all pollinating insects. The problem is wide variety and pesticide vulnerability across thousands of pollinating insect taxa that renders the honeybees an inadequate representative for the pesticide testing when it comes to environmental harm. Because most of our pollinator species that are pollinating the 90% of wild plants across and agricultural crops across the globe are wild. And there's more than 4,000 species of native bees in the United States, 400 of them in Virginia. We have 750 species of butterflies, 11,000 species of moths, some species of flies, wasps, beetles, thrips, birds, bats, and other vertebrates. And only a few species of bees are widely managed, to include the western honeybee, the eastern honeybee, some bumblebees, some stingless bees, and a few solitary bees. So why are these native bees affected significantly and harmed significantly greater and multiple pathways than the honeybees? They're smaller. Most of them are smaller. So you see the scale on this diagram. So they have a higher surface area to volume ratio. So a higher pesticide dosage is being administered during these applications of the herbicide, of the pesticide, than it is on the honeybee, because the honeybee is a different, larger insect. So that's one thing. It's the basic morphology. So native bees lay eggs directly on raw pollen and nectar, and the larvae feed on that food. So they require nest building materials, mud or leaf pieces that can be exposed to chemicals contaminated with pesticides, like leafcutter bees, miner bees, some predatory wasps that use mud to build their nests. So unlike honeybee larvae that feed primarily on secretions, which is called brood food or royal jelly from nurse bees that are only in the hive, the eggs of most non-honeybee species are laid directly on this contaminated dough of raw pollen and nectar, and the larvae feed directly on that. So that dough contains much higher concentrated levels of pesticides than the glandular secretions of those nurse bees on which the honeybee larvae feed. So what does that mean? It means, the honeybees are less affected because of their colonial nesting and their life cycle. Here's another reason why it affects native bees so much more significantly than the honeybees is the foraging behaviors. So you see the concentric rings here. Native bees use much smaller foraging areas than honeybees. So if they're foraging only on a property that is sprayed, they are getting a higher concentration than honeybees that range much farther, up to a couple of kilometers, to forage for pollen. And so this reduces their opportunity for those pesticides to get diluted by other pollen collection by the native bees or nectar before it's being delivered to the larva. And so this particular study that I'm showing the diagram from found that honeybees can forage many kilometers from their hive. Bumblebees roam over a much smaller area, solitary bees even far less than that. Honeybees also use that waggle dance to communicate the location of rewarding flower patches to their nestmates, to their other worker bees. So honeybees have a reduced pesticide exposure from visiting a greater mixture of foraging sources. So the hive may survive, but solitary bees will not. And, you know, if a solitary bee is ingests or affected, comes into contact with these pesticides, it ends all reproductive capabilities for that individual, whereas the loss of honeybee workers doesn't end the hive. It doesn't, you know, if they're in, and if honeybees, if the colonies are lost or significantly impacted, they're managed as an agricultural crop, agricultural livestock. And so they're replaced by an industry that plans for loss. And sustaining biodiversity isn't covered by any insurance that we have. And we haven't been contributing enough to our ecological bank to recover from that loss. Wild bees, other non-managed pollinators, size, breeding, nesting, foraging, and other behaviors increases their vulnerabilities to pesticides. So Xerces Society worked with Earth Justice and back in December submitted this petition to EPA to broaden their testing protocols to expand and codify mandatory testing, because the current testing doesn't test oral, chronic, or acute toxicity on larval or honeybees even. It's just surface contact. And again, their metric is if it kills 50% or less of the laboratory tested populations, which is a very controlled environment, then it can be approved. It's considered an acceptable risk, loss of those honeybees. But additionally, there's no codified mandatory testing of these pesticide impacts on bumblebees or solitary bees. And there's no codified mandatory testing of pesticide impacts on butterflies and moths. I will tell you that in Europe, they do have these testing and regulatory guidelines for pollinator risk assessment. So it can be done. And so this petition by Xerces is intended to close the data gap in the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, specifically the terrestrial and aquatic non-target organism data assessments, data requirements. Okay, so it is possible to control mosquitoes without mosquito fogging. So what do we tell our clients? What do we tell the public when they ask us? We just can't, you know, we're not telling people to just accept, you know, mosquito presence, but there are other ways to manage them. Researchers point out that preemptive insecticide use is inconsistent with EPA's own integrated pest management principles, which prioritize the management of pest damage by the most economical means and with the least possible hazard to people, property, and the environment. So the Pollinator Partnership advocates integrated pest management, which shifts away from automatically turning to chemicals and to use a variety of practices, sort of layered practices that systematically address pest management and, most importantly, aim to prevent the pest problem from occurring in the first place. And it provides a powerful set of tools, as we know from other IPM information that we have for managing pests in the garden. The Pollinator Partnership also advocates for an easily understandable labels that give clear directions on pesticide use and the best means of ensuring pollinator health. So what are some of these components of integrated mosquito management? Source reduction is the most important. It's the most effective way to reduce mosquitoes, to eliminate their breeding sites. Any object that water can puddle in, old tires, flower pots, children's toys, tarps that are, have dips in them. And a really big one is the corrugated gutter extensions that people use from their downspouts to move water away from their houses. The tiger mosquitoes can get just enough water from the surface tension of water that is retained on the corrugated extension to lay their eggs and as a breeding area. And that's one that surprises people when we tell them that. And there are ways you can manage that. Even you can put netting and mosquito dunks inside those corrugated extensions. You also have to empty water. Like if you have bird baths, you want to empty them at least once a week. Twice a week's better, because the tiger mosquitoes have a 3-day larva hatch cycle. And don't forget those bird baths. So another important action is to remove dense vegetation, such as English ivy, that has really leathery leaves. So if it's really dense and it gets compacted on the ground, it also has a lot of surface tension that holds water in the mass growth of English ivy on the ground and in the trees. And that's enough for egg laying as well, and for sheltering and harboring mosquitoes. So it's another good reason to encourage people to remove their ivy. When you need to keep water, such as bird baths or rain barrels, you can set up water wrigglers. Birds will actually love those for the bird baths. And you can also put mosquito dunks in your rain barrels and cover it with a screen. So that's a perfectly acceptable way to manage it, where you have to keep water on your property. Not advocating this particular brand. There's a lot of brands of mosquito dunks, but you can make a very expensive and inexpensive, very effective and inexpensive larva trap using Bacillus thuringiensis israeliensis, BT dunks, commonly known as BT dunks. They're an effective biological control. It's a bacterium that's naturally found in the soil. You use a dunk, a piece of a dunk, some straw, dry grass, water, dry grass or leaves, and water. And the female mosquitoes are so attracted to the sweet, mucky smell that comes off of that concoction in a bucket, and the CO2 that is coming off of that. She goes down and lays her eggs, and the larva hatch, and the BT kills the larva. It is a specific dipteran toxic bacterium. It doesn't harm other insects, pollinators, pets, or people. I mean, you don't want to drink it, but it is a relatively harmless when used responsibly. It only affects dipterans, the fly family, larvae. And so this setup attracts them to the concoction, the mosquito tea. It's called mosquito bucket of doom, or mosquito tea. And it creates just an irresistible breeding site that then shuts down that life cycle without harming pollinator pets or people. So here's how you do it. You got a bucket. There's a lot of free buckets available out there. A darker bucket is better than a white bucket. You can paint them. If you get a free bucket and it's white, you can paint it. You can make it darker. You add the straw, grass, leafy material. You fill the bucket halfway or 2/3 full of water. You add 1/4 of a mosquito dunk. You let it sit. You place it away from, the corners of your yard is better. Shady spot is best. And you replace the dunk every 30 days. You don't have to replace the water. In fact, the water, the more unctuous, mucky it gets, the more attractive it is to the mosquitoes to lay their larvae. But if it gets really gunky, you can, start the concoction over again or swap out another bucket that you've got going. Optional improvements for this are, you've got it sitting out there. You would want to if you're not using a lid, you want to put a large stick in there, because other animals could fall in and drown. I personally like to use the hydroponic lids, which cost, you can find them for $3 to $5 a piece online. And they actually come, the hydroponic lids are sold in like 1 gallon, 2 gallon, 5 gallon sizes, I think even quart mason jar size. So, and those are absolutely critter proof, and the mosquitoes go in, but critters can't go in. You'd also, it's a good idea to drill a hole at the water line so that you don't have to go out there, so that the bucket doesn't overflow in heavy rain. So that's a good idea as well. And even better, get your neighbors to do it, because if the hole, you can also, there's a type you can also make much more cheaply. Right now, a year ago, you could get 2 for like $35 online. Now they're 2 for about $100, but they're extremely effective. Use a very, very small amount of pesticide or mosquito dunks. They kill the adults because they trap the adults as well, in addition to the larvae. And this trap recently was very successfully used in a study by Rutgers and Rutgers University in a University Park, Maryland town, where they got a whole neighborhood, a whole community to put these ovitraps out, one in front, one in back, and they got all of the neighbors to commit and to not use mosquito fogging. And they were able to reduce, they had graduate students going out collecting data, collecting mosquitoes. And it was a very rigorous study. They achieved 80% reduction in mosquito populations in that neighborhood. And they're sold on it. They use it to this day in Maryland. Maryland is pretty far along in its public education on this type of mosquito management. You can make your own ovitrap. We have a link to these directions. It's very cheap, costs maybe $1. You can, by using a black sock, a little bit of screening, a cut plastic, like a 2-liter soda bottle, and you can hang these from trees around the corner of your yard. And it's the same principle as the bucket trap. It's just a little bit smaller, and they're hanging. So personal protection, this is also something that we can advise people to do. You can protect yourself directly by wearing long sleeves, long pants, applying insect repellent such as DEET or Picardin or OLE if you want to use the oil of lemon and eucalyptus. And another method, if you're out like doing a lot of work and coming into a lot of contact with foliage, and like if you're doing a lot of gardening, you can treat the clothing that you wear with permethrin. Now, permethrin is extremely toxic. You definitely need to pay attention completely. And then you wear it. You wash those clothes separately from your other clothes. It's good for about 6 or 7 washings. And I wear permethrin treated clothing in the field when I'm doing the Virginia Working Landscape field surveys, because I'm often walking through chest-high wet hay fields surrounded by wetlands. And I am not bothered by mosquitoes or ticks at all. And so that's pretty effective. But, I use your judgment. I don't recommend that for your everyday clothes. That's if you're just out. And this is a really great one. Mosquitoes are really weak flyers. So set up a fan where you're sitting outdoors. And I am finding that more and more of our wildlife sanctuary program clients who are doing deck remodeling or patio remodeling are actually having these commercial fans built into the structure for this very reason. So that seems to be a growing trend, which is, I guess, great, because the mosquitoes aren't bothering you. They can't reach you. Community education, you know, that's a role that we play as master gardeners. One of the most important ways to advocate for integrated pest management is community education, and you can do this during your master gardener outreach or wildlife sanctuary program ambassador work. These are pollinator, beyond pesticides, door hangers. This next one is a brochure, a trifold that Northern Virginia Bird Alliance has adopted. I like this one because it not only in a simple way, understandable way, describes the harms of broadcast spraying for mosquitoes, but then offers ideas for how to control them without spraying. So again, you know, we're not a proponent of living with mosquitoes. We're just a proponent of managing them in a less harmful way to the environment and those pollinators that are so essential to the environment. And just this week, Leslie got this into her mailbox. I got this into my email box. Homegrown National Park, which is Doug Tallamy's campaign for planting native and increasing biodiversity, preserving biodiversity, is the Mosquito Bucket Challenge that you can join in. Stop the bite, save the buzz. There's the link. They're encouraging everybody to employ these buckets, take pictures of them, and put them up on the Homegrown National Park website and to spread the word as a campaign to more effectively and environmentally safe way to control mosquitoes, manage your mosquitoes. So that, let me just recap. We advocate for integrated pest management to control mosquitoes. Research provides a large body of evidence that mosquito fogging harms pollinators, impacts biodiversity, and is the least effective way to manage mosquito populations. There are alternative methods and more effective methods in targeting mosquitoes at the larval stage by breeding site removal and attracting them at the larval stage, attracting them to lay their eggs to kill the larva. Several of these buckets placed discreetly, you know, under shrubbery and shaded areas, not anywhere near where you're sitting, because, you know, it does call in mosquitoes to the, you know, those areas. You don't want them to mistake you, carbon dioxide coming off your skin for the bucket. So you put the buckets in the corners of the yard. Front and back is great. And again, I use those hydroponic lids because they're pretty foolproof for, you know, non-target things getting into the bucket. And again, as a reminder, one of the biggest culprits and that is not effectively managed by most homeowners are those corrugated gutter extensions where those tiger mosquitoes are breeding. So that's what I have to tell you. We have a pretty big public outreach community education program going. We hand out those pamphlets at our tabling events. We hand them out to our clients when we make wildlife sanctuary program visits. I wear this Ask Me About Mosquitoes button everywhere. I take one of those mosquito buckets to every tabling event or every talk I give. And people say, your button says I'm supposed to ask you about mosquitoes. What do you have to say about mosquitoes? And then I can talk to them, you know, just briefly about there are other ways to manage, and that mosquito fogging is not the most effective way, and it is very harmful. So the demand for this knowledge and the lack of knowledge by the public is out there. So we can all do our part. So I'm happy to take questions now, and I'll stop sharing my screen so you can see me. I can always bring it back up if somebody needs to see a slide.
Okay, it says, do you have any stats on how spraying harm pets, like dogs who walk in sprayed lawns?
Yes. They're beyond, if you go to the Beyond Pesticides website, they cite studies that talk, that have provide evidence of increased cancer rates and tumors in dogs. And I assume cats. I don't know, but it mentions dogs.
Someone said, may I share the handout on her Facebook page? and the neighborhood
Absolutely.
group page? Yep. Go for it, Christina.
Yeah.
Yep. No. If any of you who are on tonight want to visit from our ambassadors in Prince William, you can just get in touch with the help desk. See any? That doesn't look like, oh, here's one. As much as I want to get rid of the mosquito population in my yard, are they not a food source for bats?
They are. They're a very important food source for bats. And in fact, if you use effective mosquito management, you know, there's still mosquitoes in the environment for bats to, you know, to consume. There's more biodiversity. We're encouraging better biodiversity rather than destroying it.
I don't see any. Oh, wait. What are your thoughts on using Thermacell?
Thermacell.
Yeah.
So Thermacell, I think if I understand how that works, the pesticide is inside of it and it's a hanging, is that a hanging?
They can hang or sit on the table. I have ones that
Uh-huh.
sit on the table.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with those in this research that I've done, so I could certainly, you know, do research on them. I have not seen them mentioned a lot. I don't know whether it's because they're expensive or so no, yeah. So I just can't speak to the Thermacell in terms of how their effectiveness or whether they harm. I would doubt that they harm because I think it's a contained device.
It's on a little like belt or a piece of, I don't know, cottony fabric that you stick in, and then the ones I have anyway.
Yeah, I think that's
it's-
like an overtrap. I think that functions like an overtrap,
Yeah.
is what it sounds like if you have a wicking.
Do dunks harm other insects or
No,
as
only
they dissolve?
fly
No?
larvae, only dipteran larvae.
Yeah.
Only fly larvae by species that lay their eggs in water.
There you go. That limits it.
So they do kill fungus gnats. You know, you could use mosquito bits in your
There
house.
you go. Yeah.
Fungus gnats. So,
You know, and that's true that you can, you know, I know at our teaching garden, I buy the bits.
yeah.
So like after the rain last week, I had a puddle for a while. So I just put, you know, a few bits in it to keep the mosquito population away. I think. Anybody else? Doesn't look like it.
Source reduction is so difficult.
Mm-hmm.
What else? I can't.
Water collects in the leaf. Oh, she says water. And you mentioned that water collects in the leaves of large plants.
Mhm.
I'm thinking of like the cup
That's why you
plant.
want those that's why the buckets. See, if you have these mosquito tea buckets or buckets of doom, the mosquitoes are going to opt to lay their eggs there rather than on water that's on a large leaf.
Okay.
They're going to opt for that. It's going to cause them to go lay their eggs there in
Okay.
great numbers.
There was
Someone
a-
asked. Go ahead, Leanne.
There was a product that I bought at Southern States. I haven't seen it around, but it was also, it must be like an
Ovitrap.
trap where you hung, they were these red things that you hung in your trees and stuff. but I can't remember the name of them.
Mm.
I
Same
think the
kind
key
of,
is whatever you use, you want to look at, are other insects going to be affected?
mhm.
But actually anything that attracts the insects to the device that you're using is going to be less harmful than fog.
Sure, yeah.
But so I just give an example for pest management. So one of the things that some people do to keep insects from getting up on their foliage is they use that sticky tape around trees, but that gets everything.
Yeah.
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 No.
Yeah.
So if whatever you're doing is going to potentially harm the other insects in a not, non-targeted fashion, then it's probably advisable not to use it.
Makes sense.
Well, thank you, Liz. It's always nice to hear you talk because you do so much research.
Can everybody see my ask me about mosquitoes?
Yeah.
Yes, I see that.
Oh, stand up straight again. What's it say on that, on your shirt? Just about the,
Oh, it says to biodiversity and beyond, spring peeper frog and the rosy maple moth. This was a homegrown national park fundraising campaign. I got this last year. I just love it. Kids love it.
oh, sure. Okay. I think that's it, my
And
dear.
I'm happy to share the slides with you, and I'm happy to have people have the slides. I don't.
I
So we
appreciate that.
It's been recorded. Once Thomas has a chance to edit the recording, we'll post a link for it
Okay.
on our YouTube channel, and I will be sending out an evaluation with the link for the YouTube probably early next week.
Great. And if, I'd love to get feedback on, ways to improve it. If, obviously talking to the general public, I don't go into as much detail. I try to be more general about the harms and the alternatives. But talking to master gardeners and wildlife sanctuary program ambassadors, I think it's important to have the basis because we do get challenged by a lot of people.
Yes, for sure.
Yes,
And
I just
like giving people tools where they can provide the evidence without sort of getting into an argumentative situation.
Exactly. Yeah.
With the public, because we're all.
I just had somebody Monday come, and he was trying to sell me to spray my yard. And I was like, no, I don't spray. I use all natural stuff. And he's like, what about mosquitoes? They're a pain, aren't they? I go, yeah, but I just use mosquito dunks and the thing. I said, I don't have a problem. He was trying everything to make a sale. I said, I'm sorry. I said, I just don't believe in all that spraying stuff.
I have so many people comment about where have the fireflies gone? When I was growing up, there used to be so many fireflies. Well, I'll tell you where the fireflies have gone. They've been killed by insecticides. They have a 2-year larva period underground. And
there's not enough vegetation for them to hide on anymore.
Right.
And fireflies are predators. So, we want
Yep.
them.
This is how good this guy was. I said, I plant stuff to attract the
Insects.
good insects. So he's like, well, what do you consider a good insect?
Lord.
I went, really?
Well, that's like, it goes back to the verbiage on the flyer that I got in the mail. It just refers to all insects as pests.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a very commonly held belief by the public because they have no reason to not think that. People don't like pests in their house. They don't like pests in their yard. They don't like, and it's just because there's lack of understanding of, the beneficial services that many of those insects provide.
Those companies even tell me when they come to my house that they don't harm other insects.
Oh,
They'll say they only kill the
well,
mosquitoes.
that is false advertising.
Bump.
Yeah,
And Doug Tallamy has said that
yeah,
in several of his webinars now. which
They're
I'm
young
surprised he
kids.
Actually said
yeah.
Yeah, this kid that came, he was probably maybe 21, 22.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
it's false advertising.
yeah. These buckets, though, is this a new thing? Has this been going on forever? I mean, I'm
I've been aware of the buckets for probably about 10 years.
okay. Do you need hay? I mean, I don't want to buy a big old.
You don't
bale of
have to
hay.
buy hay. I find that the hay and straw works pretty good because it works fast. The water, it gets pretty mucky fast. Then if you put
Yeah.
grass clippings in there, but you can use grass clippings, handfuls of leaves, anything that's going to produce that, decompose and produce carbon
Oh,
dioxide.
attraction.
So one thing is you can go to a pet store and buy a small
mhm.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
what-
where they have for the
Oh,
rabbits and
hamster
stuff.
or
for
rabbit.
hamsters.
Yeah, they have these little teeny.
I get murdered in my yard with mosquitoes. I can be outside for 3 minutes and I'm covered with
Yeah.
mosquito bites.
Yep, it's the so one of the things that I do, Leanne, is when I'm just out working in my yard is I wear a ball cap and I have sprayed
Yep.
permethrin on the inside bill of my ball
Mhm.
cap and all around my cap, and it keeps and then I wear long sleeve light colored clothing. They're attracted to dark colors.
Okay.
And so, white is best, light colored clothing, white or khaki tan, and then, long sleeves, long pants. But the ball cap has, really,
I'd spray my straw hat the same
Yeah.
way.
Mhm.
yeah,
It keeps those gnats out of your eyes too.
Yeah.
yeah.
Do we have the information on how to make the mosquito bucket traps in our farmer's market information?
Mm,
Oh, that would be great.
that would be good.
And bring one.
Not to my
And-
knowledge.
Even those brochures you showed at the
Yeah.
end that show, the damage and then how to mitigate it. Yeah. That would be nice.
Well, we have the PDF. I guess we could print some
Yeah,
off. the
we can
next
print 'em
one.
out.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
That would be great because I'm working the farmer's market this weekend. So if we had that, we could really talk it up.
Somebody will have to come by the office and pick them up.
I could do that.
All right, well, you got to give me
Great
a
idea.
bit.
I think you'll find people really want to talk about it.
I'll do that tomorrow.
I think people
Yeah.
will. And the buckets are so inexpensive. I mean, you can actually do them for the price of the dunks. And if you're buying, a thing of hay, but the price of it, and if you're buying a bucket, and if you're buying a hydroponic lid, but still $15 max, probably.
Oh, it's worth it.
Yeah, you can-
It would be
you
worth
can
it.
Do it for free other than
Right.
the mosquito dunks.
So the other day I read an article on what you should wear in your yard to minimize mosquito bites. And there's certain colors
Yeah.
that white, green, blue, or purple,
Mm-hmm.
they said to wear. And then, but don't wear colors like red, orange, or black because that attracts them to you.
Right.
I just go out to water my plants. I mean, I'm not thinking it all through so thoroughly, and then I'm covered with mosquito bites. I guess I just have to prepare better.
I wanted to add something about the boxes. I did put it in the chat, but I'm the person who made up the boxes a long time ago. I think there is a mosquito folder in the clinic boxes. So if you're, check your box, because I thought we had put how to make the mosquito bucket in there, but I could be wrong. It's been a while since I've looked at that particular folder.
Yeah,
Well,
I don't remember seeing it in the Dale City Market box.
Okay.
The mosquito pamphlet is new too.
Yeah. Well, it was just, I did, I copied it from a website and then printed a bunch of them. It
Oh.
wasn't an official thing. It wasn't like a flyer. It was just here's how you make it.
Oh, okay.
And
That
so
could be, yeah.
that's what I know that we have. I'm sure that we can probably find something better now. That was several years
Yeah,
ago.
we could get the brochure printed and we can put it in there.
Yeah.
We could maybe even for the markets only, nobody wants to store one more thing, have like a sample bucket, not with the water in it.
Right, that's what I do. I just have a sample bucket with the materials and then the brochures. And,
That would-
and then I have a
that's-
QR code to where you can.
Okay. I have seen that somewhere too, that bucket at something. I don't remember what though.
Liz, did you put your hand up on purpose?
No,
Yeah.
no, I didn't. Let's see. Oh, hang on. Oh, sorry. You know, I'm just clicking around,
That's okay.
talking chewing gum.
Yeah. Okay, so, well,
Thank you
again,
very much, Elizabeth.
Oh,
It was
you're
very,
welcome. My
it was very
pleasure.
informative.
If there's any follow-up questions, I'm happy to field them. So enjoyed.
and if you write any new talks, let me know.
Okay. I enjoyed being with you all this evening. Thanks for sharing your time.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Elizabeth.
Alrighty.
Take care.
Good night. Take care.
Good night.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this video, please let us know with your questions, comments, and suggestions for other classes and videos. For more information on lawns and gardens, contact the Extension Horticulture Help Desk at mastergardener@pwcva.gov. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.